First year in 2020, guess what? We get $7 million. So we get 1% of it right there.
Right.
Yeah.
What are you complaining about?
Yeah. Well, here's
1% is 1%, Jim.
Well, yeah, I know. But here's
I'm
one
frightened.
And it goes to 2% the next year.
Right.
Oh boy.
Well, I mean, there's awful.
This is the road to riches, Jim. You can tell.
I can see that.
The percentages tell you.
You know,
Well, good morning. Welcome back to Talking Racine. On my left here is Mr. George Myers, the chief of Reasonable Consideration.
Wow.
And to my right is
Am I going up in status around here or not?
well, hang on, George.
Yeah.
I've gone from doormat to...
Because over here we got our producer, who is the man in charge of
we can cut that out.
in charge of anger management.
Yeah, that's it.
And I'm the man in the middle, your host, Dr. Ken Jorgen. The man in the middle. I like that. We are going to talk about Foxconn today to start this program off.
Foxconn?
Yeah. You've heard of Foxconn.
We've never talked about that. Yeah,
That's that big Taiwanese company that has come to Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin to save the entire southeast district of the state and stimulate economic growth and just bring all kinds of wonderfulness in its path.
No, what's it called?
And we've got some things to consider. What was it, last week or the week before that Mount Pleasant had gone into a recommendation for bonding?
Correct. A couple weeks ago, I think they put it out. Or at least they did.
To the tune of how many millions of dollars?
Roughly, I think there's 4 or 5 different notes, but I think it equals about $350 million.
$350 million. That's a good
$350 million are bonding.
Correct.
Right.
And what are they bonding? What are the bonds for?
This is for the infrastructure, I believe, around Foxconn, up and around, and
So what they do is they put out bonds that private investors invest in, $5 million. So that goes back to the city as cash that they will now spend.
Mount Pleasant, actually.
Mount Pleasant, sorry, the village, and they will spend on Foxconn type related.
Yeah.
Right.
Activities,
it lists
infrastructure, etc.
It lists some of those.
Community development revenue bond. That's community development, sewage system. I got it right there.
Land purchasing is part of it.
Well, I think.
Well, it's not part of this particular. I mean, the whole bonding package that we went over in the past was over $600 million. $760 million. Was it?
And I think it's closer to $800 million.
Yeah, I recall a $700 million
$700.
total bonding that the city's going to spend it. And the reason it's bonded is because they can't get it out of you taxpayers right now.
But
if they could do that, they would do that.
Right, it'd be a lot easier.
But you don't happen to have the $700 million.
Get a better job.
Yeah, so they bond it, and then the village goes into debt. And if they can't pay the debt, well, then guess who pays for it? Then they will come to you.
But I think Mount Pleasant, or at least the county, has to be, are you ready to bond for $350 million? I mean, they had bonded before, I think it was somewhere in the range of $60 million.
Yeah.
Now it's $350 million additional.
Yeah.
So now we're talking,
We're talking big money,
We're
Jim,
talking big
but
money.
there is a reward. And what is that reward?
13,000 jobs.
You got it.
Yep.
That's why we're taking the risk, or you are taking the risk. That's why.
Plus related economic development.
Plus related economic. Yeah, in other words, all the supporting structure that comes in there.
Yeah.
Correct.
To in people that aren't with Foxconn that have to go give them rides, for instance, or bring materials there or something like that.
Right. And in the I do believe there's some offshoots of activity happening now because of Foxconn. I do believe that. Is it going to be warranted down the road as a good investment or not? I mean, we're going to wait and see. I got my own opinion on that, but I do believe there is some activity happening because of Foxconn in the area.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
No question, no question.
Right, and there are some things that,
people getting to work or getting prepared to go to work
or
there.
Some activities, apartments. They're looking at apartments. They're looking at other offshoot companies that could possibly come in and supply Foxconn or associated businesses.
There's this investor from California coming in and buying a lot of real estate, and that may be part of
Right.
his
Well, it's not-
plans.
it's
Is
not
he's
the-
looking at this. He's a big time investor. He's big time company coming
George,
in.
you
I'm
get the
going to go
dice
there.
out,
Yeah.
you throw them, and you see what happens. You know, there's investing.
What have they bought?
At least that's his money. He's not asking
Right,
us and Racine
exactly.
to help finance it.
Now, is this the guy who's buying the site that the arena was proposed for, or is this the Walker
No, this is a guy that
Manufacturing
buy
land?
idols, and he's
He bought a lot of smaller,
He's
yeah.
buying smaller
Different, yeah.
buildings there. I have a
Oh,
friend
okay.
who's trying to open up a store, and every time he gets ready to buy a shop or something, this guy comes in and buys it out from underneath him.
Hey, good for
and
him.
he says
Hey.
the problem with the guy from Gal, he's got cash, and all I can do is give him a land contract.
But the fact is that they're going to borrow $350 million in addition to it. Huge amount of money. And I guess at this point, the bonding rating has dropped in Mount Pleasant, so so it's going to cost a little bit more. But I think the idea here, my personal thing is I think it was driven by politicians, and whenever that happens, it usually ends up in disaster. But
Here's another part of this puzzle is that Foxconn needs the money to do it. They're not going
Right.
to come in here without the $350 million or $700 million or $800 million, whatever it is.
Right.
That's part of the deal. That we will go there. We will come from Taiwan to your land here in the village of Mount Pleasant, if you will give us this money, or you make this investment, and we promise to pay you back too.
Right.
There's also
now,
a
what
payback.
they required was $4.5 billion from the state of Wisconsin in credits and cash. There's a lot of associated, of this spur to the airport. A lot of the purchasing of the eminent domain of the properties in that
Yeah,
area.
right.
There's an awful lot of requirements that Foxconn put on Mount Pleasant and the state of Wisconsin to put this project together, which, to me, it's a gamble again. We're putting all this in there, and what are we going to get back? And, if
You're
it
going to
works
get to
out,
13,000 jobs.
and $20 million a year, supposedly $20 million a year from
huge amounts of
Foxconn,
money. That's right.
and another $10 million a year in tax revenue from supporting companies. So you're talking a $30 million a year benefit in tax increase revenue.
That's this chart here. This shows the $30 million after about year 4.
Yeah, it's projected to
coming
hit in about 2024, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's 2024 that actually reaches that. So we're 6 years away from that.
That's a projection, and
Yeah.
the last jump between 2023 and 2024 is $8 million.
Yeah. Well, it starts at 7, goes up to 15, goes up to 23, and then 31 down the rest of the chart.
Right.
So it builds up starting in 2 years from now, and so
Hopefully.
we're talking 700 million. I'm going to use that figure because it's nice. Because the first year in 2020, guess what? We get 7 million. So we get 1% of it right there.
Right.
Yeah.
What are you complaining about?
Well, here's
1%'s 1%, Jim.
Well, yeah, I know. But here's
I'm
one
frightened.
And it goes to 2% the next year.
Right.
Oh boy.
Well, there's awful.
This is a road to riches, Jim. You can
Yeah,
tell.
I can see that.
The percentages tell you.
I'll tell you, anytime you, again, if you're in the stock market, there's mutual funds where you can go and you can invest in a lot of different companies, and so you have this kind of even flow, I guess, of investment. Or you invest in one company and you say, boy, I hope they really come up with that new product or whatever, and the stock goes up and you make money. The other thing is they forget to make the investment, or somebody stole the plans to it, or somebody dies in a plane crash and the stock takes a nosedive and all your money's gone. That's kind of what we're playing with here.
Yeah, this is not a guaranteed thing.
No.
As
You
a
guys
matter
are
of fact,
very,
part of this
very
agreement,
disturbing in your attitudes.
part of this agreement it's very explicit about the state of Wisconsin is going to have a moral obligation to which will pledge coverage part of the debt service in the event Foxconn is unable to fulfill the obligation of the valuation guarantee. So they're
Let's
already
break that down a little
they're
bit.
already making.
Anytime you're talking about moral obligations in government, I get a little queasy.
Now, the reason they use the word
Come on,
moral
it's Scott
obligation,
Walker.
right?
Yeah, what could go wrong?
They're using moral obligation because they do not have that contract in place. And that's it. So they would have said the agreement or the contract That's not the word. They use moral obligation.
That's right.
Because they don't have.
Well, it's got to be a moral obligation.
Well,
to me
wait a minute.
Means we don't have a economic obligation. We don't have a legal obligation. It's just a moral obligation.
Well, wait a minute, fellas. Wait a minute.
We
wait
should
a minute.
do this because it's the right thing to do.
Let's not be judgmental. Let's look at the history of this company and find out just how well they've performed in other areas. Now, there's an example that's down in South America.
Brazil.
Brazil, right.
You said something about that earlier.
Yeah, but I was mistaken. I jumped the gun.
Jumping the gun, okay.
Yeah, now we can talk about
Now
Brazil.
we can talk about Brazil.
What happened in Brazil?
Well, Brazil, Brazil.
In Brazil, I mean, Foxconn was going to build a big facility there.
Well, they did.
Yeah,
they
did. In 2011. They built a
2011.
In 2011, the company pledged to invest $12 billion. That's Foxconn.
Yeah.
In the country and create 100,000 local jobs.
100,000 jobs for $12 billion and for
No,
$10
they got a
billion.
$10 billion investment in Mount Pleasant. $12 billion.
And we're only getting 13,000.
Right. Well, here's and then again, and this is a 2011 article, which was large facility housing, and they had here even says in here, it says Foxconn most famous set up a stringent list of demands for Brazil to meet before it builds its $12 billion plant.
Why don't you read some of those, Jim?
A large facility housing more than one Foxconn division, high-speed internet.
We got that, right?
Yep, high-speed internet. I mean, we've got...
They want that here.
Now we got driverless vehicles that are going to come,
Yeah.
shipping at airports, including...
Well, that would be part of the expedited
Right.
shipping, too, I suppose. wouldn't it?
funding support of Brazilian National Bank. Now, there's a little difference here between, I think they learned a little bit in Brazil before they came to Wisconsin, but assistance in local investors and small investors. Now,
In other words, the local government is going to be the shill for private investors.
yeah.
Because I don't think there's any national bank.
They're
There's no
gonna be
bank
soliciting
funding this,
private
right?
investors.
There's no bank funding this in
Well,
Mount
you know,
Pleasant?
we don't know all the details of that, but
Yeah.
you know,
We're going to dig.
Yeah, I think I want to dig a little bit deeper into Brazil and exactly what happened, because it's sketchy to find out how exactly that deal was put together, but it's very familiar, very similar to what's happened in Wisconsin.
What I see is if there is a Bank of Elmwood someplace that's investing in it, that's fine. But what I see is it's the village of Mount Pleasant,
Right.
backed up by a moral obligation from the state of
Correct.
Wisconsin,
Right.
that is replacing the Brazilian National Development Bank,
Correct.
and assistance in finding local smaller investors. you know.
Correct.
The bottom line, I think, is what we're saying is that step one looks a lot like step one.
There seem to be parallels.
It looks like a pattern or practice.
And hopefully the parallel doesn't carry out to what happened
parallel?
in Brazil.
What do you mean? What happened in Brazil?
In Brazil, 6 years later, because all the stuff we were talking about was in 2011. 6 years later, in 2017, which is like a year and 4 months ago, Foxconn set to discontinue Brazil manufacturing operations.
Whoa.
Ouch. They did reach a peak of 2,500 jobs of the 100,000 that were projected.
Here's the statement in the article.
2.5%.
Yeah. You know, it had pledged $12 billion in the country and create 100,000 local jobs within 6 years.
Right.
However, the promises made by the company, by Foxconn, soon proved hard to keep. Whoa. The company wanted the Brazilian to come up with 30% of the cash as well as private investors. So they
Both failed to materialize.
6 years later, they're in operation and they're saying, we need more money. It's not working the way we planned.
Well, if, and God forbid, the success of Mount Pleasant parallels the success of Brazil, they achieved 2,500 workers down there out of a projected 100,000. That's 2.5%. 2.5% of 13,000 here would be 325 jobs. a little bit short of what we're all excited about.
Well, and you know, if
But we're not Brazil. We don't speak Portuguese.
Well, there's a lot of things you could kind of go with here. You know, in 2017, Foxconn's profit dropped as iPhone shipment growth slows. So there was a little problem with supply of product. So their product, I mean, they're like any company, you know. I mean, anything of supply chain can change, which could drop their profits. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go on in a company. I mean, to drop this kind of cash on a company solely seems like a huge risk to me. And now we're asking the citizens of not only Mount Pleasant, the county of Racine, to sign on in this huge debt on a company that just walked away from Brazil. And, you know, we had talked prior to this show about what is the aftermath of this leaving Brazil. And we don't have quite all the answers to that, but we certainly are going to look into it.
Well, just because you get through the investment step and we put in the $700 million, the point is it doesn't guarantee success for the whole 30 years that it's going to take to get through. And here in Brazil, they started off very similar to what starting off in Mount Pleasant. After 6 years, they just found out it wasn't working out so well. Police come up with the money. We need additional help. Brazil said no, and
how do you say
Foxconn
no
said,
in Portuguese?
Adios.
I think that's it.
It's not funny.
But here's one of the things I kind of want to bring up is, you know, as I'm looking at this, and they talk to after now they're going to leave Brazil, and they go to the government. They say, listen, we'll stay, but we need 30% of our investment in cash to be influxed into the company to stay here. You know, and of course they said, no, we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
I think they left Brazil saying, wow, we got to get the cash up front so we don't have to worry about this down the road. So they came to Wisconsin and came to Walker and said, listen, we need a little cash. How many jobs you want? What makes your political future look bright by how many jobs? Well, let's put that down on a napkin here and let's figure it out. So I think that's kind of what happened.
Literally.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
Well, you had mentioned several Talking Racine shows back that when Foxconn originally started up with the plan, how many jobs were they talking about? 2,500 or something?
25 or 35, something like that.
Yeah, a small number, but that wasn't mentioned enough.
Right.
Politically not feasible.
Yeah, Scott Walker wanted 10,000. So they said, oh, you want 10,000? Oh, okay, we'll do 10,000.
And I think, when this first was announced, I remember that was in, I think it was July of 2017, just about the time they were leaving Brazil.
Yeah, but nobody knew that.
No, nobody knew it at the time. But when they came in, I think it was you, George, that said, when there's that many politicians on a stage, watch out. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. I want this to go forward because I know that the political careers, I might add, are all on the line out there. And I'm not talking about political careers. I'm talking about your political life.
Jim, a little bit of clarity. It's not that you want this to go forward. You want this to succeed. Because, there's a lot of room to go forward and not succeed there. So.
No, I do want success for it. I mean, you're in it. If you're going to dump $350 million in it, really, for the sake of whole Racine County, you want it to be successful.
Well, anyway, the caution flag is up.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move on to our next topic, which is a little more locally oriented. I mean, we're talking about the City of Racine here, and that is the long-term capital improvement plan. We're going to spend a little bit of time now looking at this. So, Jim, I know you've got a comment to make about this initially, and there's a couple of things that are of serious concern to you, particularly shifting items around in the budget.
Long-term capital improvement plan. One of the things that I think that has to be looked at, and I don't think, and George, we can elaborate on it, is the fact that some of the debt or the wages or pay-as-you-go kind of stuff you would, in your own household, you would pay, buy groceries weekly, pay the utility bills, different things like that. That particular type of activity is now being put on a credit card, more or less like in the capital improvement plan, which means it's on debt. So now that capital, though, you buy your groceries on credit card, you put utilities on credit card. Well, eventually, but that's a way.
But we're not talking about groceries here. What specific things in this?
Well,
in this plan are you talking about?
No, in terms of,
I know engineering was one thing.
In terms of magnitude, we are talking about groceries.
Yeah.
In other words, if you look at the city with an $80 million budget, and compare it with a person, let's say, of an $80,000 budget, which is like 0.1%. When you buy a $20,000 truck, it's like buying a $20,
Yeah. Right.
something at the grocery store for $20. And they put the truck on capital improvements. It'd be like you going out to the grocery store and putting your little quick shopping on into your internal debt.
Correct.
So, yeah, when you get into classification of items, food doesn't compare with trucks. But when it looks at the money thing,
But when you look at your home budget,
You're talking about a size comparison.
yeah, it's a size compare. See, the city doesn't buy things like groceries, so it's hard to. What is this? What's small to the city? Well, the only thing that's small compared to a person is things like groceries.
Yeah.
Or a pair of shoes.
Right.
Or
small
or a
items.
dress or something like that.
What we're doing here is we're taking the whole engineering wages that should be paid weekly or monthly or however it's paid, and moving it onto the credit card, more or less. So now we've taken that out. But what that does do, because the cap that's on the Wisconsin municipalities, it does free up some cash. And then that is then used for little perky type things that we look for in the budget. The mayor has a few employees that he now hires in his office. So, but the credit card has been upped because of that freedom. He was able to go on and buy whatever he thinks that they particularly need.
Okay, now what else does that do in terms of taxation? Does that not allow taxes to be raised, which have been capped by the state of Wisconsin? But one way of avoiding that capitation of taxes is to put it on debt service. And so if you're shifting something like engineering salaries over to debt, then you can raise taxes to pay it. Is that am I seeing that right, you guys?
There's several ways to raise taxes.
Yeah.
One way is to just put up some new buildings. All right, that's considered an expansion of your tax base. You get to increase taxes by the percentage of whatever that new construction was. If Machinery Row had come through with the $64 million, that would have been $64 million added to our tax base of several billion dollars, whatever it is. So we could have raised taxes. The government could have raised the tax levy.
Right.
The tax levy now, don't confuse that with the tax rate. The tax levy by that percentage. All right. Another way to raise it is by referendum, which Sturdivant is considering.
Great.
All right, they're considering a referendum so that they can raise the tax revenue. In other words, just get more money out of the population. The third way is if you decide you're going to pay off debt, you can increase the levy to pay off debt. Well, that's a very convenient loophole, because all you have to do then is increase your debt and say, well, we're increasing the levy to pay off the debt, so now we can raise taxes.
So if you're shifting things to the credit card, like engineering salaries or whatever else you want to pull out of the budget, you're actually increasing debt, thereby enabling yourself to increase taxes.
That's right.
The tax levy.
Now, here's what I'd like to look at, because we're getting into the tax budget, the tax document, which gets very, very complicated, and the council is going to start its budget proceedings very soon. And I think we should maybe follow through on that procedure. So if you're watching it on cable TV, you know what's going on.
Right.
All right. And the first step that's going to go on is kind of an explanation of the budget document. This has typically been done by the department heads, which each department head would bring in their section of the budget and explain it to the council members.
So department heads are typically like
the building department, the health department,
Department of Public Works.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's
each one of them would come in and do a presentation.
Exactly.
To the
Right. What I'm looking
Parks
for.
and Rec,
Right.
the water department, the
But
library.
that no longer happens.
Well, that's what I understand. Is now James Pelenek, the city administrator, has come in and presented each department heads for the department head. But the procedure is still going to be the same. And it was, I watched it for many years until it came up as an issue, and that's when I found out what that procedure was. Because it sounds like a very distinguished, inquisitive, intelligent type of procedure, and it's not. But what it is the department heads or Jim Pelenick presents the budget, and then the council members ask questions, and they ask relatively, they look into a budget and they'll find something they have a question about and they ask about it. And I think it was last year or the year before, someone came up and suggested, well, why don't we do something about that?
Right.
You know?
Right. What do you mean do something?
Well, in other words, let's take an example. Let's say the police wanted to put buy an additional squad car, and somebody asks a question. Well, what does that mean? What do you mean buying a squad car? What for? And that would get explained. And then what happened is the alderman went to say, well, do we really need that? And point of order. All right, we're not allowed to discuss that at this time. Could not discuss making any change.
When does that discussion ensue?
Yeah. See, and that was very interesting. I did not realize all that was this whole three meeting facade was that that they were asking questions about the budget document, and it made it sound. What is that? It's not really good.
Exactly.
But all it was, you could only clarify it. You could not make any changes, and that went on for 3 meetings. And that's the first part that you're going to see. And when you hear these questions, it's not because they're making any decisions. They really are just saying, what is that white dot over there? What is that cross T over there? What are those things? All right. Then. The next step is to go into a procedure where they get to make suggestions, and this is done at one meeting.
One meeting.
We spent 3 meetings just asking questions. Can't make any suggestions. Can't do anything about it. One meeting you get to make suggestions, and this is where again it sounds kind of reasonable, but in practice it is totally unworkable. And that is because each alderman just goes over to his corner of the city and can look at something, but can't discuss it with any other alderman. He can't caucus ahead of time because that's against the law. All you can do is you submit your suggestion to the city administrator. He puts it on the calendar, and then at this particular meeting, he starts going through the suggestions. Reads them one by one, and it's gotten so bad that I think the last one there were maybe 2 or 3 aldermen that even made suggestions.
So if you're an alderman and you decide, I don't think we need an armored vehicle for the police department, or for the, let's make it even more ridiculous. I don't think we need an armored vehicle for the meter maid. Why are we doing this? But you're raising that question as an individual.
Yeah, and
the other 14 aldermen are looking around like.
Well, one of them that actually came about was when Christine Saracen was on the council. Let's go back to an old one, and she brought up, well, let's reduce. She wanted to, cut the budget, and she says let's have each department reduce its expenditures by 2%. Not like a simple thing to do, but you know what? That's rather dramatic. It takes some discussion. It maybe takes some research. It takes some inquiring into how are you going to do it, how is each one going to do it. Well, you don't have time for it at that meeting because you have this list of
you either approve it or you don't.
Yeah, and for you to take up the next hour and a half of the meeting to work on this very important consideration, can we get each department head to do 2%? Well, it didn't fly, and so she cut it in half. Said, "Well, how about 1%?"
And at some point, the rest of the older persons are probably going to go, "Oh my God, it's only this much money."
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens with the discussion. Yeah. So when you come to that part of it, understand what happens and why there will maybe 15, 20 different suggestions, and none of them get passed. It's because there was no time before that to caucus, put your ideas out there, send it out to the aldermen, get feedback, compromise, come up with a change that or majority of the aldermen can buy into, and make your changes. That process is taken out of it. So all they do is they go through that meeting, and then that's it for that meeting. And then the next meeting, I believe there's one more meeting. I may be a little bit wrong, but then they get to vote on the budget.
Right.
Yeah.
So now they have a budget that's been presented to them. So why don't they just take the budget and just okay it right at the first meeting and then eliminate all the rest of the meetings and all the time?
Yeah, they could essentially do that. Yeah.
Essentially, that's what they do.
But they put that facade up there. In other words, it's a phony display. It's a show, and if you're watching it, you can get sucked into the questions and the suggestions.
Oh, yeah,
and,
looks good.
They sound good, and why didn't that go through, and all that type of stuff. But the reason it didn't go through is because it's virtually impossible.
And that's
to
where
get through.
I would think Kenosha comes back and says, "Here we got a budget. Now it's been done. I mean, it takes a while to put a budget together, no doubt about it. But they put together a fully, very
fully explained budget.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I think you get it. And then
yeah.
it's like, wow, you can read it. It makes sense. And I think that's what really Racine needs, is to really move into an area where now the regular layman can look at this thing and say, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Here's the thing with Kenosha. Let's just put this into perspective. We have an $82 million budget that the city spends. That's the money the city spends. We have a
is that in Kenosha or Racine?
That's Racine.
Okay.
That's in Racine. The levy is $54 million, I think, it's something.
Right.
I got the magnitude right, but it's in that range. That's the levy. That's the amount of money that you pay for in the city expenditures in your property taxes. City spends 82. You pay 54 of that in your tax levy. The balance in that $28 million comes from other funds, other places.
Right.
Don't worry about that.
Some
but
of
the
it's
point
state money, grants, et cetera, et cetera.
But then there's this thing called capital improvements expenditures. That in itself, in 2018, is in the neighborhood of $40 million. So that's another big percentage of the budget.
That's a large chunk.
That's a large chunk of it. And that is represented by a table. That's all you see is a table. Now, Jim Palahniuk has taken that table and he's made it look a little bigger, because he'll have, for each number that's there, let me get back to the number, he shows the total expenditures here, and then he says the DPW is so much for streets, so much for this, and so much for that, which is basically just like a expanded wordage of the same thing. You haven't got any additional data.
Right, there's no data.
What page is the donuts on? Where are the donuts?
The thing is that is a part that I think really needs to be explained better.
Yeah.
If you look at the Kenosha budget, capital improvements plan, if you look at the Kenosha capital improvements plan, when it talks about a street, it doesn't just give the name of the street and the amount. It shows you a map.
It's much more detailed.
Of what it is, yeah. And then it shows how much is in capital improvement, how much is state funded, how much is this, how much is that, and some of the conditions of the street.
Well, you know what else it does, George? It gives the citizens a place to say, hey, my street's going to be done in 3 years from now or 4 years from now. Our alley's going to be done or our street's going to be done. I think it gives a sense of community to the citizens who feel like, hey, I'm just throwing this money in and I'm seeing all this crazy bullshit going on in the city of Racine. It makes it difficult to feel connected to your community and feel that they're doing their job.
That's exactly right. When that picture's there,
right?
It's right there. There's another one. They were getting a little piece of land for the airport. A picture is there, just what the land is shaped like, where it's going to be in the airport, and
And I cannot believe.
It's a funny thing. It's called transparency.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that level of complexity and transparency. The cost of that cannot be so severe that we are unable to do that.
No, it's very important.
Because it creates the possibility of monitoring expenses to the point where we could probably save vastly more than the cost of that producing that budget.
And the average person gets an idea what's happening within their city and what they're paying for. Yeah. And I mean, it's actually, truthfully, the Racine budget is an embarrassment, because I've looked at it for years. It takes a damn near an accounting degree to go through it. And the Kenosha budget is actually enjoyable to look at, because it really does kind of spell it out.
It's right down there.
Yeah.
It's 500 pages. It's capital improvement plan.
Got pictures. Got pictures.
Pictures, right.
And something that's going to be bought 2 or 3 years down the road.
Right.
Where in ours, this is a 10-year capital improvements program.
No, you know what they do, George, too? They put this money away. It doesn't really go into that, because that's kind of their little slush fund in the capital improvement. And so we're going to put
they'll shift around here. They call them placeholders.
Oh, my God. It's like, where'd that money go?
Right.
Well, it's over here now. Well, who took it over there? Well,
we just moved it there.
Yeah, we just moved it there. That's an accounting.
Moved back a year, up a year.
Oh, my God.
No,
it is so bad. We need an audit so bad in Racine, and we need to specifically look at particular areas.
A forensic audit.
And I'm going to tell you something. When we go down into it, and I still say it, when they came in halfway through the budget period and they took $4.5 million out of reserves and gave it to the employees in the city of Racine, I just like, is this really happening in front of me?
Made you want a city job, didn't it?
Oh my God! I'm like,
good grief.
How does this work? I mean, you actually just basically dipped in, pulled out what you needed. I mean,
well, what we're trying to do is at least tell you where to look to find this stuff, and we're doing the best job that we can to make the things that you look at more understandable.
And I hope you would look at those. If you watch some of that budget proceedings, it'll be broadcast on Channel 25, and keep that in mind. What we said here, what the first part is when you hear the alderman asking all those questions. Yeah. That's all they're doing. What does that mean in that picture? What does that mean? Why is that?
Well, and if you don't understand it, ask your alderman to explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know,
stay
in touch with your representative.
They're not changing anything; they're just asking questions about it. And by the way, your alderman should know about it.
Yes, they should.
You shouldn't be expected to understand this. Aldermen should be. They should understand this, and they should have a chance to sit down and discuss with other aldermen their ideas about saving some money.
And you know what they should do, really, George, is get into the community, into their district, and bring that budget to the district. Have a budget meeting here. This is what's going on in this community here,
and show up for the meeting.
You know, I mean, It really is. I mean, you really have to engage your community. I mean, to get a community that's engaged is going to be a better community for all. I don't see it.
No.
Don't end with that. No, don't. Be encouraging. Create hope here.
It's very hard to do.
So this is our Monday morning project to create hope. So,
have we ever done that?
Well, there's always an opportunity.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's good. We're going to call it here today. We're going to close off. We think we've given you enough stuff to consider, and we're glad that you're here to join us in this consideration. And we enjoy doing this. We hope you enjoy watching it. And please come back and see us again next Monday. Have a wonderful week.